Thanks, Yvonne. We have just got time for one more speaker, Chris Baugh from PCS. Those people who did want to speak, make sure you come to the open mic at the conference centre because we have plenty of opportunity there. So quickly over to Chris.
Thanks, Linda. Comrades, always a pleasure to get the opportunity to speak at the National Shop Stewards Network. And again, as everybody said, the content of all of the interventions, the heroic strikes that have been covered in the course of today's meeting, this is the flavour that we want to take into the TUC, and this is the message we want the TUC to take heed of. And I just want to say about the Shop Stewards Network, it's always a privilege because I'm proud of my union's support for the Shop Stewards Network, where an activist culture defeated a right wing in league with the Thatcher government and the security services, where we fought against austerity, and it's that activist culture, not just in PCS, that's been reflected in all the contributions today that can make unions into the fighting militant organisations that they need to be, confronted as we are with an all-out assault on the conditions of workers, not just in the public sector but generally. But let me just immediately introduce a subject that rarely gets covered in much debate in the labour movement. One of the few debates that's going to take place in the course of this week. They've stage managed on most of the issues, and that's a motion tabled by the Bakers Union that calls for a ban on fracking. Now, this isn't climate change is a trade union issue, and I hope that other unions will support that particular motion, recognising that despite the public health and environmental risks, despite the fact that only 14% in polls show support for fracking, despite the fact of local opposition overruled by a Tory minister, despite the domination of the energy companies that rip off customers, cause fuel poverty, and are the cause of climate change, despite injunctions taken out against protesters, despite all of the opposition, they are now ploughing ahead with fracking imminently. And I think it's very important for the trade union movement to not just pass the motion tomorrow, but to support the protests and the action on the outskirts of my old town, Blackpool, but to make sure in the course of the protests and the struggle that we put an alternative in. It is a scandal that instead of ripping up the countryside on the outskirts of Blackpool and many other parts of what they derisively call the desolate north, all the terrible risks that will have upon the population, yet there is a clear alternative based on public ownership and public investment into wind and wave and clean technology. And I hope that unions will recognise that climate is a trade union issue, that we support the stance of the Bakers Union and others involved in these protests, and we mobilise on a massive scale to stop the fracking going ahead. Now, I just want to finish by making a couple of points about the question of solidarity. Now, my own union, like many, has had to deal with an unprecedented attack on members' conditions, but at the same time, an unprecedented attack on union rights. They cut the time for reps. We've removed national collective bargaining many, many years ago. Reflected, astonishingly, in a document leaked to us that was a discussion paper at the Board of Revenue and Customs, whose task you'd think should be to chase the tax avoiders and the tax dodgers, but instead spent a discussion on how to achieve, and I quote, the organisational degradation of PCS's capacity to represent its members. And on top of that, we saw them remove the long-standing method of collecting subscriptions designed to cripple us financially. And my point in conclusion is we defied, as with the POA and the RMT, that also had to contend with the removal of that method of collecting subscriptions, PCS continues to fight on. And despite the biggest ever vote for industrial action we've ever recorded, the perverse requirement of a 50% threshold means that we're not in a position to take formal action. But our fight goes on. reflected in a number of notable disputes where we work, where our members in the Ministry of Justice, for example, are fighting attempts to impose worse conditions for derisory pay offers. And I'm proud of the union's fight alongside United Voices, seeking to organise super-exploited cleaners in some of the central civil service departments to fight for a living wage. And it's struggles of that character, of the care workers in Birmingham, of the heroic fight on the railways to keep the railways safe for the public, for the bakers seeking to reach out to exploited workers in McDonald's. That's the future of trade unionism. That's the type of trade unionism that will make it relevant to young people. That's the type of trade unionism that will tap into the millions of unorganised workers where the need for trade union protection, but not just the right to pay subscriptions. Unions that will fight when you join, that unions will stand up and fight, as Terry Bullinger said. That is the way to attract the young. That is the way to convey a message to future generations and build their power. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Chris.